Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this, a vast, untamed wilderness stretching endlessly, interrupted only by the determined creak of wooden wheels and the rhythmic crash of waves against a ship's hull. The people aboard, weary yet resolute, carry with them dreams of freedom, wealth, and a fresh start. But what did these settlers actually face when they arrived in this promised land? Today, we'll unravel 8 little-known facts about the colonization of America that will challenge what you thought you knew. From the forgotten struggles of early settlers to the surprising contributions of unsung heroes, this journey will take you deeper than ever into the layers of history. And I promise, fact number 8 will completely change your perspective on the foundations of this nation. Stay with us. Fact 1. First colony mystery. When you think of the first permanent European colony in what is now the United States, Jamestown is probably the name that comes to mind. But here's the kicker: Jamestown wasn't the first. Decades earlier, in 1565, the Spanish established St. Augustine, Florida, a settlement that predates Jamestown by 42 years. This settlement wasn't just a minor outpost, it was a thriving center of Spanish influence, complete with forts, missions, and a complex relationship with nearby indigenous tribes. Imagine a bustling, multicultural port where Spanish, African, and Native American cultures intertwined. Yet when we talk about the birth of America, why is St. Augustine left out of the narrative? The answer lies in how history has been told. For centuries, the English perspective dominated American historical accounts. By overlooking St. Augustine, we lose sight of the broader story of colonization, a story not just of one nation, but of many competing for influence. Fact 2. Starvation truth. We've all heard stories of harsh winters and the struggles of the early colonists, but here's something you might not know. Many of the famines they endured could have been avoided. Let's take Jamestown, for example, the first permanent English settlement. When the settlers arrived in 1607, they weren't entirely unprepared. They had tools, provisions, and even a strategic location near the James River. But what they lacked was adaptability. You see, a significant number of these settlers were gentlemen, men of status who had never worked a day in the fields. They believed their role was to manage wealth, not toil for it. Instead of planting crops or securing sustainable food sources, they devoted their energy to searching for gold, convinced that striking it rich would solve all their problems. This misplaced priority, combined with harsh winters and disease, led to the starving time of 1609 to 1610, during which nearly 80% of the colony perished. The desperation of this period is almost unimaginable. Recent archaeological digs uncovered chilling evidence, human bones with cut marks indicating cannibalism. Imagine the psychological torment that would drive someone to such extremes. But here's the most tragic part. Native tribes, such as the Powhatan Confederacy, often extended a hand of help. They offered food and advice on farming the local land, lifelines that could have saved countless lives. Yet, the settlers' cultural arrogance and distrust led them to reject this aid. Instead of seeing the Powhatan as allies, they viewed them as threats. This wasn't just a story of hunger. It was a lesson in the dangers of rigid thinking and unwillingness to embrace new ways of survival. How might history have been different if the settlers had set aside their prejudices and worked with the people who knew the land best? Fact 3. Women's role in survival. History books often highlight male explorers and leaders, but the survival of early colonies owed much to the determination and resilience of women. Take Jamestown, for example. By 1620, the Virginia Company realized the colony needed more women to ensure stability and growth. They sent over dozens of women, many of whom endured grueling conditions, to start families and create a sense of community. One standout story is that of Anne Burris, a 14-year-old maid who arrived in 1608. She was one of the first English women in the colony and quickly married a laborer, becoming a symbol of hope in a struggling settlement. Despite disease, hunger, and hardship, women like Anne laid the groundwork for permanent communities. Now here's a thought. What would have happened if these women hadn't braved the journey? Would these colonies have survived long enough to make it into our history books? Fact 4. Native alliances. When settlers first arrived, they were greeted not with hostility but with cautious curiosity by many indigenous tribes. Alliances formed out of mutual necessity. The Powhatan Confederacy, for example, provided the Jamestown colonists with corn and other essentials during their first years. However, these alliances were fraught with tension. The settlers' hunger for land and resources quickly strained relationships. Take Pocahontas. Her story is often romanticized, but the reality was far more complex. She was a key diplomatic figure, yet her kidnapping by the English highlighted the fragility of these alliances. The tragedy here is profound. What could have been a foundation for coexistence devolved into cycles of mistrust, violence, and displacement. Can you imagine a different path, one where cooperation prevailed? Fact 5. Dutch legacy. Before New York was New York, it was New Amsterdam, a vibrant Dutch colony founded in 1624 at the southern tip of Manhattan. While the name has changed, the Dutch influence on America's identity is undeniable and surprisingly enduring. The Dutch didn't just establish a trading outpost, they brought with them revolutionary ideas and practices that would quietly shape the foundation of what we now call the American spirit. One of the most remarkable aspects of New Amsterdam was its culture of tolerance. At a time when much of Europe was embroiled in religious strife, the Dutch embraced diversity. The colony welcomed settlers from various religious backgrounds, Jews, Lutherans, Quakers, and others, who found a rare haven in a world dominated by rigid doctrines. This openness wasn't just an act of goodwill, it was a pragmatic policy. The Dutch understood that diversity was good for business, innovation, and stability. But here's a fascinating twist. When the English seized New Amsterdam in 1664 and renamed it New York, they didn't completely erase the Dutch legacy. Instead, they incorporated many of their practices. Free trade policies, emphasis on local governance, and even a tolerance for religious differences persisted under English rule. These values quietly wove themselves into the fabric of early American life, influencing the nation's future trajectory. Today, New York City's identity as a melting pot of cultures, ideas, and commerce owes much to the Dutch foundation. The Dutch spirit of inclusivity and pragmatism lives on, even if their pivotal role in shaping America's values often goes overlooked. Isn't it fascinating how the echoes of a forgotten past continue to shape our present? Fact 6. African contributions. The narrative of enslaved Africans in colonial America is often reduced to one of oppression and labor. While their suffering cannot be overstated, it's equally important to recognize their profound contributions to the development of the colonies. Take rice cultivation in South Carolina. Enslaved Africans brought with them advanced knowledge of growing and harvesting rice, a skill that turned the colony into an agricultural powerhouse. Their cultural traditions, songs, language, and even cooking techniques became embedded in the fabric of colonial life. Here's a chilling yet powerful thought. Despite being treated as property, enslaved Africans left an indelible mark on America's cultural and economic foundations. How different would the colonies have been without their expertise and resilience? Fact 7. Environmental changes. The arrival of Europeans didn't just change human societies, it transformed the environment. Colonists introduced new animals like pigs, horses, and cows, which altered ecosystems and sometimes disrupted indigenous ways of life. Crops like wheat and sugarcane replaced native plants, reshaping the landscape. On the flip side, Native Americans introduced Europeans to crops like maize, potatoes, and tobacco, staples that revolutionized European diets and economies. But with these exchanges came unintended consequences, such as diseases that decimated native populations. Consider this. Within a single generation, entire regions looked unrecognizable. This ecological upheaval was both a testament to human ingenuity and a sobering reminder of the costs of rapid change. Fact 8. Religious freedom myth. Finally, let's talk about one of the most enduring myths of colonial America, that it was founded as a haven for religious freedom. While groups like the Puritans fled persecution, they were quick to enforce their own strict religious codes in the New World. Consider the case of Roger Williams, a minister banished from Massachusetts for advocating religious tolerance. He went on to establish Rhode Island, a colony that truly welcomed diverse beliefs. This raises a provocative question. Was America's founding really about freedom, or was it about creating spaces where specific groups could impose their own rules? It's a nuanced story that forces us to rethink what we mean by freedom. The colonization of America is a story of ambition, struggle, and contradiction. Each of these 8 facts adds a layer of complexity to a history we often oversimplify. From the overlooked contributions of women and enslaved Africans to the environmental and cultural transformations, the legacy of colonization is anything but straightforward. As we wrap up, let's carry this thought with us. History isn't just about what happened, it's about how we remember it. By exploring these lesser-known truths, we gain a richer, more honest understanding of the past.